Okay, this is Catherine Lambrecht from Chicago Foodways Roundtable. I haven't had to say that for such a long time. I think the last program that I did for relative to culinary historians was back in April when it was our first Zoom meeting, and it was on the potato. Our program tonight was something where I saw this book. I hope that's oriented correctly. If not, I apologize. It's Mike Sula's. It's a compilation of all of his, or not all of his, 50 of his favorite columns over the years. And it's a fundraiser for the reader to keep it in operation, as well as this cookbook, which I think is also being shown in mirror image. Sorry about that. But we want to be supportive of our local press because it's sort of dwindling. But we want to be supportive of our local press in whatever form it comes in. And Mike Sula has certainly been an influencer related to the food culture here in Chicago for the last 25 years. And I do recall the first time I met you, but I will insert that later when I ask a question. So Mike, I turn it over to you.
I don't remember the first time. Was it a little Three Happiness? No.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was a dinner organized by RST, and we were in that. We were on oh gosh, on the north side, the Vietnamese town.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh.
And it had I think it was the place with the golden lions in front, but whatever it was, Richard had gotten them to make deer or venison jerky and some other off the menu items, which he has a talent for getting people to do.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing you, and you were one of those, I'm sorry, I've seen it with other people who are writers. You weren't exactly a participant, you were like an observer. And you sort of melted into the walls watching the interaction of these, I would say, ardent food enthusiasts. Because I think back then we were still Chowhound. We hadn't yet gone on to LTH Forum. But, the culture is what it is.
Yeah. I do remember that night. I remember there were ant eggs also.
Yes.
I don't remember the name of the restaurant. I'm not sure if it's still there or not.
And I think it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be. Yeah, that was that. I don't remember what year that was, but that was probably in the very.
I'm thinking 2003, 2004.
Yeah, well, it was definitely near the beginning of LTH Forum and near the end of the Chicago Chowhound. No, I mean, of course, not the end of Chicago Chowhound, but near the beginning of LTH Forum, I think. Right?
Oh, it certainly deflated Chowhound for quite a while.
Yep. I was lurking around because I had either just written a story about LTH or was about to. Maybe.
No, I don't think LTH was on anybody's horizon. It was cool weather.
Okay.
Because I remember wearing a jacket, and LTH, as it was founded, was really the end of May.
Yeah.
Well, nobody would be wearing a jacket likely.
Well, I can definitely see that I was probably lurking, which is kind of what I do online anyway.
But you showed up at this event, a special invitation, because RST was very excited to have you, but like I said, you were present, but you weren't participating in a sense. No, I saw that because I've seen this with other people who do your type of job. They kind of melt into the walls to see how people interact and not influence how they interact.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I try. I'm also I'm also a born introvert, so that's probably part of it too. But as I mentioned, I've always been a lurker on LTH more than a active participant, and I've gotten lots of story ideas from LTH, which I always try to acknowledge.
And I appreciate that, because I remember one time, I'm sorry to divert, but I remember one time it was, I found some restaurant that was very unique, the Japanese restaurant on Montrose. Was it Montrose or Wilson? But in any case, everybody referred to it as internet buzz. That internet buzz was exactly one person, me, and I'm telling you, internet buzz. And those people knew darn well who it was. It wasn't like we were strangers to each other. So I appreciate your giving attribution whenever it's possible.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's nothing happens in a vacuum. But I mean, I got into, I approached my writing for the reader 25 years ago. Much of what I've written has been inspired by wandering around the city looking for food, looking for interesting food, interesting restaurants, interesting producers. That's how I went about approaching my job as a staff writer, or early on as a freelancer. I started at the Reader. I started writing for the Reader in February 1995. 25 years to the month before the pandemic.
Gosh.
And I've written a lot of stories, and the pandemic has sort of the Reader's been struggling for quite a while, like a lot of news organizations are, and the pandemic hit it really hard. We lost 90% of our advertising, but our publisher, Tracy Bain, who is a dynamo and an inspiration, she went into high gear, and she figured out all these ways to raise money and raise funds, and part of that was the Reader Recipes Cookbook, community cookbook, 80 recipes by Chicago chefs and bartenders and a few food writers, which simultaneously made me crazy in the early months of the pandemic, and also kept me sane, because we had to throw this huge project together, but it also kept me really occupied and busy in my mind off of the horrors outside. But then another initiative she took was she wanted to start a greatest hits series of anthologies, the collected works of staff writers. And the first one was by our music writer, Lior Galil, and I was next. Tracy said to me, go back, pick 50 of your favorite stories over the last 25 years. And if I had really thought about it, I would have suggested maybe cutting it in half, because I started at the Reader in the good old days when there were no deadlines, and there was no space restriction, and freelancers and staff writers could write about whatever they wanted, and that's what I did. I wrote about whatever I wanted. I didn't start as a food writer, but I did start covering small mom and pop, out of the way restaurants that weren't getting covered a lot elsewhere, certainly not in the Reader, and not in a lot of other places, apart from online communities. And I started exploring those restaurants in different neighborhoods as a way to get to know the city better, as a way of finding other stories. So fast forward to 2020, February 2020, I picked 50 stories, 2 from every year since I started writing for the Reader. And it's a really thick book, and so thick that it was very expensive to print. So they only printed 100 copies. There's still some left, but they're also selling a PDF version of the book too. And same thing with the community cookbook. So what I thought I would do I thought I'd read a short piece from it, and then open things up to discussion. If you guys want to talk about anything, you want to talk about the book, you want to talk about the cookbook, you want to talk about the weather, that's fine too. So this story is, I wrote it in 2008, March 27th, 2008. The story is called You Can't Eat There. And the subhead is, don't fool yourself. If you live in Chicago, you'll never get a reservation at Crib. 2 miles off Oak Street Beach in the Carter H. Harrison water intake crib, the phone rings. The chef looks up from his notebook, glances at the caller ID, and turns instead to a glass bong, half filled with a corked 82 Patru. He fires it up and takes a long pull on the tube. I used to smoke a lot during service, says Albert D'Angelo. Totally irresponsible, but it helps with menu planning, opens the doors of perception. If you've never heard of D'Angelo, he doesn't care. The 13 two-tops his designers jimmied into the cramped 108-year-old cylindrical water collection facility are booked for the opening on Tuesday, April 1, and every night thereafter for 2 months. The voicemail box has been full since the day the unpublished phone number for Crib went active in late February. If the call is coming from a local area code, he doesn't even bother answering. D'Angelo, the 24-year-old son of a New York Stock Exchange trader, embarked on his meteoric culinary career 7 years ago after dropping out of his Upper East Side private school. His father, a habitual restaurant junkie who collects reservations the way some people collect elephant tusks, called in a favor and laid down the law. Either his wayward son took a job washing dishes at the Mario Batali flagship Babbo, where dad was a regular, or he was out on the street. 3 weeks later, D'Angelo turned in his dish rag and parlayed his brief stint at the sink into a series of stages in the restaurants of telegenic figurehead chefs like Rocco DiSpirito and Bobby Flay. I told people I worked the pass at Babbo for 3 years. It was surprising how easy it was to get in, he says. He kept his eyes open, grabbed every chance he could to work prep, and muscled or bribed his way onto the line. If I had to call INS on some line cook who got territorial about his station, he says, I would. But D'Angelo felt the lack of FaceTime with his bosses was inhibiting his progress, and he quit just as the itinerant underground restaurant craze was kicking off in Manhattan. I realized I could cook for people who appreciated me without taking orders from some asshole sous chef with half my chops and no hope of ever rising out of the galley, he says. In the spring of 2005, with the help of 2 Salvadoran line cooks poached from Flay's Bar American, he launched The Last Supper, a weekly nomadic dinner publicized with pseudonymous postings on food blogs and anonymous invitations to rising celebrities and tastemakers. One night, it was held in the back of a Lower East Side bodega, the next in a subway power station, but at every elaborate multi-course bacchanal, the chairs were filled with artists, musicians, writers, bloggers, and other chefs. Before long, suspiciously familiar analogs of some of his dishes began to show up on the menus of fine dining restaurants all over the country, including Chicago. Edible menus? Mine. Foie gras lollipops? Mine. That cat who was serving sushi on a naked girl? I did that first, with pasta. But the manifold pressures of staging weekly 20-plate dinner parties began to take their toll. D'Angelo started losing sleep, breaking wine glasses, and ejecting customers for taking pictures. The night GQ critic Alan Richmond came in, I just looked down at my hands and decided I had to get away, he says. D'Angelo dropped out amid wild speculation. Some said his operation had been infiltrated by the health department. Others that he's being blackmailed by jealous chefs. Still others that he'd lost his teeth to meth mouth. Now D'Angelo is banking on a comeback. He acknowledges that the rumors and his unruly reputation helped fill the Crib's voicemail, but he resists the implication, leveled by a number of his older colleagues, that he hasn't paid his dues. I'm no different than any other chef owner. I've worked my ass off. I've had to submit a business plan to my investors. I had to go out and grease palms to get my permits and location like anyone else. D'Angelo promises a transgressive menu, but is keeping most of his plans for opening night a secret. If I told you anything, I'd have animal rights naval blockade on my hands, he says. He did offer some hints. Ducks and geese aren't the only animals that you can force feed for big livers. I was allowed a peek at the tiny remodeled kitchen that once served the Water Crib's 4-man crew, where the 4-seat chef's table commands $1,600. Security will be tight around the customers, but not for their benefit. They'll be frisked for digital cameras, and D'Angelo is requiring them to sign non-disclosure agreements before they can step off the speedboat that will pick them up from staggered locations along the shoreline. I do not want to see my creations on the menu at Alinea in 3 weeks, he says. If that happens again, I'll unleash the lawyers. Asked when Chicagoans might get a taste of his work, D'Angelo paused and took another pull on his bong. I'm not opening a great Chicago restaurant, he says. I'm opening a world-class destination. And for better or worse, diners that make those distinctions live in New York, Los Angeles, London. These people have read that Chicago is the new front line in the culinary jihad. They don't compete for reservations at Gordon Ramsay anymore. They're looking for something most people can't have. And now Chicago is the place most people can't have it. Most people. Did anyone ever eat at Crib? Not if you lived in Chicago, you didn't. Albert D'Angelo was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. That story was written 12 years ago, and he disappeared right after that. And in some ways, he predates the whole the whole Me Too movement and the, you know, toxic male chef character that's sort of been run out on the rails as of late.
I have a question. Was the restaurant really in a water crib out in the lake?
The restaurant opened on April 1st, 2008 in the Carter Harrison water intake crib.
Wow, because those are so heavily secure and guarded now. I mean, I just wanted to do a story on one. They're like, nobody, for national security, no one can go anywhere near it.
Yeah, yeah. It was shut down shortly after that, shortly after April Fool's Day, 2008.
How long did it exist?
Shut down right after April Fool's Day, 2008.
So was it an April Fool's joke then?
That was my April Fool's column on April Fool's Day, 2008. It
Such a sucker
feel
for those
so
things.
stupid. Like, how did I not know about this place?
That's what a lot of people said. Well, you went. I mean, if you're from Chicago, you couldn't get in. He didn't want you there. Yeah. So that's a rare piece of fiction in the book. That was my April Fool's Day column that year, and I did manage to get it over on a lot of people. A lot of people posted a number of outraged comments about this guy. And they're all, you know, we switched servers and all the comments are lost. I wish they weren't, but a lot of people were out for Albert D'Angelo's head.
Wow, I was thinking, I hate Mike. He got such great freaking quotes. Wow, this is like, there's like gold. You couldn't make those up.
And he did.
I wish he was real, but he wasn't. Everything else in the book is 100% factual, I promise. Yeah, there are a lot of food stories in the book, but there, you know, as the title indicates, I had, you know, in a lot of the you know, for the back half of my career at the Reader, I've been the Reader food writer, and you know, I've written restaurant reviews and profiles of chefs and producers and things like that, food related things. You know, the Reader let me raise a rare heritage mulefoot hog for 1.5 years. The Reader let me go to every single Harold's Chicken Shack in the city and evaluate it. The Reader let me do a lot of fun food-related things, but I started out just as like a freelancer, or not a freelancer, but then a staff writer at large, writing about anything. But I noticed as I was looking back over the years that a lot of these stories seem to involve animals and humans in very strange relationships, and not just like predator-prey relationships. Just, you know, there was this colony of raccoons in Rose Hill Cemetery that people were feeding hot dogs and peanut butter sandwiches to. They came to a very untimely end. You know, there was a woman in Ravenswood Manor who kidnapped her neighbor's cat and let it loose because she thought it was a menace. You know, I spent a summer with fossil collectors in Braidwood, Illinois, who are just their passion is just collecting these 300 million year old fossils of extinct invertebrates, including the Illinois state fossil, the Tully monster, which is, you know, if you've never seen one, it's just one of the weirdest things imaginable. So that's where the title of the book comes from, An Invasion of Gastronomic Proportions. It comes from a story I wrote when the morning after a torrential summer downpour. I was going through the park along the river, and there were thousands of like these bright red crayfish crawling out of the river, and there are all these people plucking them out of the water to take them home and like make crawfish boils with them. And it turned out that they were Louisiana crayfish, the ones you buy by the pound in New Orleans, and they're an invasive species in the Chicago River now. So
they're an invasive species also up in a lot of Wisconsin lakes because they were used as bait, cheap bait, right. And then they took off.
Yeah.
This is Linda. I have to tell you, I've been reading your restaurant review column for years, and and I've been to a number of them, and they're all just right on. I just trust your recommendation because. So, how did you get into food? I mean, what is your background when you were younger? I guess. How is it that you got into this food critic career? Did you have did you enjoy food when you were younger? Are you a cook?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for saying that. And I mean, it all starts with, a love of eating. In some ways I grew up, my mom was a typical, housewife of her generation, and she cooked with, canned vegetables and I mean, looking back, I wouldn't say she was like a very great, well-rounded cook, but she was pretty good at some things. And so was my grandmother. And I loved to eat, and I loved to start, I started cooking when I was a kid, just simple stuff. Jell-O, I think, was probably one of the first things. I just love to cook and eat my whole life. I don't have any formal culinary training other than just like eating everything.
But do you have a...
But
Go ahead,
then, eventually, as I started at my writing career, as I mentioned, I saw food as a way to get into the neighborhoods and meet people. Everywhere.
Okay.
Particularly, I would write about restaurants opened by like first generation immigrants or their children, and every immigrant has a story, and that's just kind of the way I looked at it.
I read your article about Di Candela.
Yeah.
It's a kid. He's a computer programmer. His dad immigrated from Peru. Mm-hmm. This was all in your story, and the kid started a business, but needed his father's recipe, and I mean that story just was totally got me hooked. I mean, I go back. I've been back there a number of times.
Good.
I think it's moved. I think it's still there, but it's moved.
Yeah, not far away. It just moved around the corner on Irving Park in a bigger space. I actually live in that neighborhood. It remains one of my favorite restaurants in the city. We probably order from there twice a month. It's just the best pollo a la brasa in the city, as far as I'm concerned. But like a very deep and great Peruvian menu of all kinds of things that are just terrific.
And in Peru, what they do is they bury the chicken. They build a fire in the ground, put the chicken on the fire, and they bury it. But I don't think they're doing that at the restaurant. But somehow, it's delicious.
They are cooking it over charcoal, though, or at least the old place they were, and I'm certain they still are at the new place because it's what it tastes like. That's one of my favorite places. Thanks for bringing that up.
Hi, Mike. I'm Veronica Hinke, and I just love your stories like everyone else does. It's really neat to meet you here virtually tonight.
Thanks.
I'm really curious about how you chose all the stories for the book. I know it would be hard to narrow it down, but especially would love to know more about how did you pick the story about Crib for tonight?
It was short, and it always gets a rise out of people, and it is like one of the ones that people seem to remember a lot. It like not long after that was published, it was outed. Some people figured it out, and it bamboozled a lot of people, but it didn't last long, unfortunately. But I don't know. I just remember that was just a really fun week. The reaction to that story. So I just thought, well, let's see if it still works. Let's see if it still has legs. Sorry, I did not mean to deceive you. I mean, I did, but I'm glad we're all square now.
What are a couple of other stories that really stand out to you from over the years that you love?
Well, I mean, like in some of the later chapters, I included some of my more straightforward restaurant profiles and reviews, and one of the last things I wrote before the pandemic was about this woman named Julia Gam, who runs a restaurant in Bronzeville called Powerhouse. Actually, I don't know if it's still open. I've tried to get in touch with her, and I haven't heard from her. But it's a Cameroonian restaurant, and just this woman's story about how she came to Chicago. She started selling Cameroonian food to cab drivers downtown illegally out of the back of a borrowed car, and just her story about how she like, from that she built this thing. She went into a food truck. She opened a brick and mortar. She had all these. She produced a movie in Cameroon. She produced music videos with Cameroonian pop stars, and she's just a really inspiring story. And like a wonderful restaurant, and like a wonderful, like, sweet, inspiring lady. And right before the pandemic, we were like, the Reader was gonna do our first food festival, and we invited her. She was all on board, and then the pandemic hit, and she went underground. I haven't heard from her. I've reached out to her. I'm worried about her. I hope she's okay. Stories like that. I mean, there are a few in the later chapters. Like, I wrote about a place in Rogers Park called El Sabor Poblano, about a family originally from Puebla in Mexico, and they're doing super regionally specific Pueblan dishes in this little restaurant in Rogers Park. Morena's Kitchen, Dominican restaurant in, I think is it Belmont Cragen? Just like little places like that have always have always just really inspired me, and they're the places I go back to a lot when I can. I don't get, one of the unfortunate things, boo-hoo, about this job is I don't have the time or the digestive real estate to go back to the places I really love as much as I want to. So I guess I just sort of think about that sort of thing.
You've done so much for the communities and for the businesses over the years, and I just want to say thank you for all you've done. Thanks.
Thank you.
So you got an award from the James Beard for something called Chicken of the Trees.
Yeah, that's another strange story about animals or humans and their strange relationships to animals. I was so I'm a gardener. I'm not a particularly skilled gardener, but I started by growing tomatoes on the roof of my apartment many years ago. And every summer, if any of you garden, this, the squirrels maraud your tomatoes, and they do it in the most disrespectful way. They'll grab just as something is about to ripen, they'll like take a bite out of it and leave it and move on to another one. And I didn't know what to do. It was so infuriating. Every morning I'd check on my tomatoes and this would happen. It happened for years. Then one year I got a no-kill squirrel trap, and I started trapping them and then driving them out into the forest preserve, which I later learned when I started talking to squirrel experts is like, one of the worst things you can do, because you're depositing that squirrel in other squirrels' territory, and then there's more competition for food. I also learned that squirrels can find their way back to where they like to hang out. But anyway, I started thinking about this more and more, and I consulted an urban gray squirrel expert who kind of, I felt, gave me the moral authority to start eating them. So I figured out a way to trap and, as humanely as possible, dispatch the squirrels. I had a pretty famous Chicago chef who I'm still not sure is okay with me mentioning his name, show me how to skin and clean a squirrel by nailing it by its tail to the post on the back patio of his restaurant during lunch service. And no one else was around the patio, but he showed me how to do it. And then I started doing it. And once I collected enough squirrels and stored them in the freezer, I had a big party, and I invited a bunch of people over. and I made burgoo, and which is a pretty thick Midwestern Southern kind of country stew that typically included squirrels. We also ate squirrel brains. It was a lot of fun. I had a chef friend. I gave him the livers and the hearts of the squirrels, and he made a beautiful terrine. So that's the way the story ended. And sort of the moral of the story is that if things get so bad ever, there's always squirrels. They're perfectly edible.
Did the squirrel taste like chicken?
Turkey, I would say. Dark meat turkey. It was a fun story to write. I mean, that was another story, written in the golden days of the reader, where there were no deadlines, there were no space restrictions, and the paper gave me the freedom to spend 4 or 5 months working on that story. It took quite a while for it to get published because there were some legal ramifications. I didn't follow the letter of the law in catching and dispatching my squirrels. There's certain laws against trapping and eating squirrels in the city. I think the statute of limitations has run out on that, and that those were some details I had to omit from the story. But the story really resonated with people, and I don't think they were just gardeners.
What were the particular provisions in the law that you inadvertently violated?
I don't know for sure if the law still stands, but I can't imagine why it would have changed. But there's a squirrel season, and the only way that you can hunt squirrels is by shooting them in Illinois. You can't trap them, and you can't do it in the city either. So I violated some of those laws. The nice thing is, though, the mayor at the time didn't seem bothered by it, and he sent me a letter congratulating me when the story won a James Beard Award, and the mayor sent me a letter congratulating me. So once that happened, I figured that was my get out of jail free card.
Is that daily or wrong?
What's that?
Was that daily or Emmanuel?
It was Rom. Yeah.
Wow.
Rom. Yeah, and the funny thing too is that it was riddled with typos too. The letter. I'm not complaining, but it was a curiously written letter. I wish I pulled it out. I'm sorry, what?
Maybe written by a squirrel.
Yeah.
By the way, Gary Fine has his hand up. He wants to ask a question.
Hi, Gary.
Hi, Mike. I'm glad I'm back on. I had a problem with the internet. I wanted to ask you about stone flour. It's you might want to explain the backstory of it, but I'm curious that as far as I know, and before the pandemic, none of the restaurant critics in Chicago had written reviews of the restaurant, and obviously deliberately so. And how you feel about your responsibility as a critic to attend, a restaurant which is clearly one of the better restaurants in Chicago, one of the more talented chefs, although, a problematic figure, of course. Well, I'll let you answer as you wish.
Well, there's a couple things. First, and this is I'm not offering this as an excuse, but it's definitely one of the reasons why is that I don't have the dining budget that I used to have. In fact, I don't have one anymore. And even before the pandemic, the reader cut back my dining budget, and I kind of had to do a pivot. I kind of stopped doing traditional, restaurant reviews. I used to go in 2-3 times before I wrote about a place. I would wait a month before it opened, and I don't have the money for that anymore. I just can't do it. And so that dropped stone flour down on my priorities quite a bit. I had to pivot the way I do things. I went back to what I used to do, which was do more reporting, tell people's stories more than just, evaluate whether this restaurant's a good value or not for your, the average.
If I offered for you to be my guest, you know, would you review Stoneflower?
Nope, I wouldn't, because I also made a commitment, and I broke this once, but I also made a commitment not to, you know, I'm not gonna cover chefs that have huge problems like that guy does. And I don't know, Gary, if you want to give the background on all of this about him, if you want, or I will. I mean,
I don't need the background, but I'm just wondering if other people might need the background.
You know, the other thing about it is I feel, so the chef used to operate a restaurant with his wife at the time called 42 Grams, which I reviewed and I loved, and I thought it was great, and it won a Michelin star, or was it two? One or 2 stars?
2 stars.
Won 2 stars. But the chef, Jake Pickle Hop, had some problems that were not out in the open. But the restaurant came to a crashing halt after an incident one night at the end of service where he assaulted his wife at the time, and he's tried to mount a comeback with Stoneflower, and I'm not interested. I feel like there are other places to write. There are other stories to tell. There are other restaurants to write about, and
But there are a lot of great artists, Picasso being one, who are really problematic people. And, you know, so I'm not challenging you. I know that a lot of critics, feel as you do, but I'm just curious, you know, given that culture producers can be bad actors, and he certainly was, what's your responsibility as a critic?
I just feel like there are other stories to tell. He's not the only one. I also feel, I also felt like I felt a little manipulated. I felt a little duped by that whole situation, because I'm sure you've seen the documentary that was made about him. That was presented at the Siskel Center, and I knew that the whole story hadn't come out when that happened. But we knew the restaurant closed. We knew that there was, the police were involved, and she got a restraining order against him, I think. And I was invited by the filmmaker to appear on a panel with her. And I asked the filmmaker, and I said, there's this whole story. Is that something we should talk about in the panel? And he relayed to me that she did not want to bring it up. And so I respected that, but then, I participated in this panel, and the story came out later, and I just felt like I went into this thing without enough information, and I felt, I don't want to say I felt deceived, but I didn't appreciate that, being invited into this public examination of this film without knowing all the facts. And Chef Pickle Hop tags me in his Instagram posts all the time, as he does, I'm sure, with every other food writer. And I'm well aware of him, but I'm just not interested. I mean, other people are free to, but I'm not gonna. And I can't afford to anyway. I mean, I guess I didn't address your question. I mean, there's this great artist operating, and he's being ignored by the media because of his his past transgressions. If memory serves, he doesn't seem like he's very regretful. He doesn't. I can't point to you specifics, but my feeling is that he's not. He tried to sue her. He tried to sue his wife for libel, I think. That doesn't seem like someone who's examined their behavior and even attempted to make amends or grow from the situation.
So Fat Rice recently closed because of a similar situation.
Right. I wrote about that as well.
Yeah, I guess that's more newsy news. It's not really the domain of a food critic.
I write about news. I mean, I don't really consider myself a, you know, I do other things just besides food criticism. I'll write about news. I'll profile people. And I did write about Abe because I had a very direct personal experience with Abe's inexcusable behavior too, and I wrote about that. You know, I had a really ugly, awful incident with Abe last summer, and I said that was it. We're done. I'm never going to write about him again. And then I did it. I did it anyway because I felt like people should know. I felt like people that were calling him out were being attacked and not given credibility, and I wanted to lend my voice to that credibility, to say, hey, this is what I witnessed. So
I see.
I did write about one of these unfortunate chefs.
I have a question, if you don't mind me changing the subject.
Sure.
Chefs are becoming celebrities these days, you know, so I think it is wise to call them out, I guess. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's tricky when you got Hollywood squares up here, you know. I'm a little afraid of the answer, Mike. I'm wondering why you're not wearing your mask. Why are we getting to see your face?
Along with a lot of other things have just changed, and I feel like the anonymity ship has sailed. I'm not doing traditional restaurant criticism anymore, and I'm not worried about it really. I don't try to sneak in. I don't announce myself when I'm coming somewhere, but I'm also not going anywhere either. I'm ordering takeout. I'm writing about people that are doing pop-ups, and you know, I'm not writing about indoor dining. I'm not critiquing that experience anymore because I don't think it's a safe thing to do. I am writing about the ways that right now I've pivoted to the writing about the ways restaurant workers are adapting to the pandemic. That's what's interesting to me right now. Like, what are the creative things people are doing to get by, to keep working, to keep their employees working, to keep feeding people. And that's kind of what I spent the spring and summer doing, largely, is writing about just these super creative, like delivery pop-ups. A lot of young chefs, a lot of new people to the industry. And I think, you know, my suspicion is that people are going to have to get really creative this winter. Because I don't think indoor dining is gonna be a go this winter. I'm afraid. That's my feeling. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I certainly don't want to do it. I don't want to. I don't even want to eat on a patio. Like early on, my one experience eating on a patio, which I did review that place. It was the new Gino Bahena restaurant. Was so nerve-wracking that I just don't want to do it. It's not fun. And the other thing is I don't want to critique restaurants' social safety or social distancing protocols. Like, you know, I had this experience where the server kept coming up to my table with his mask under his nose, which does nothing. And I don't want to be in a position where I feel obligated to report that kind of thing. You know, that just doesn't seem fun. And people can figure that out for themselves if they choose to do that. If they choose to, you know, eat at restaurants right now. But I don't think it's safe. And I want to concentrate on the other ways that restaurants are, you know, the ways that hospitality workers are figuring out how to survive and make it through this until indoor dining is safe.
Okay. Sounds like you think your ship has sailed, though. I mean, because you can't go back and be anonymous again. Yeah.
I don't think my ship has sailed. I think
your face as anonymous is.
Yeah. Also, I've got this great mat on my face.
I love it. I think it's great.
I can just take that off. You'll never know.
Got it.
I actually do have plans to attend an outdoor pop-up that is going to be announced very shortly. That's someone I've been writing about. But her social distancing protocols are very reassuring, and I really am a big fan of this chef, and I can't wait to check it out.
So you're sort of like Mike Sula 2.0 or Mike Sula 3.0?
Yeah, three sounds good.
Because yes, I am. I'm sorry, my mother's nearby. Yeah, because it's because even for writers, keeping yourself employed is an issue, which is why, of course, this cookbook came up, because you're trying to keep an operation going when it's tough.
I've been very lucky in that I have I have two jobs. The Reader has not laid anyone off in this pandemic despite losing 90% of its advertising, and things look. I'm not going to say things look okay, but like things are going to be stable for a while, I think. And I have a side hustle. I edit a magazine about culinary cannabis called Kitchen Toke. It's all about cooking with cannabis. And that's like a whole other job that keeps me really busy. So I'm very fortunate that I have work. I have work I'm a journalist and I'm still employed. It feels like a miracle.
Most definitely, because there's so many people. I mean, well, Tribune food section is not quite what it once was. It's still going, but it's not what it once was.
It's still pretty good, but yeah, I mean, nothing is what it once was.
Right, because go ahead.
No, it's all right.
Well, in Highland Park, we had a local newspaper.
The Tribune, I want to say, is facing its own challenges, which it's now, it feels like it's about to be gutted by Alden Capital, and I don't have any inside baseball on what's going on at the Tribune, but yeah, it doesn't. Everything's terrible.
That's true. I mean, we had a very local paper for Highland Park, the Landmark. It folded immediately when people closed and they lost all of their advertising, or almost all their advertising. They went poof.
Yeah.
So you're still alive. You're still viable.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about the near future of the Reader. I think we're surviving. And I got to give credit to my boss. I mean, Tracy Bain. The Reader's. I don't know. It's been 10 years since I felt good about the future of the Reader, just because it's been, mismanaged by a series of owners. And Tracy, who's the publisher of the former Windy City Times, she just came in and kicked ass. She's just whipped it back into shape. Morale is better than it's ever been. She restaffed it. It's a much more diverse audience. It's going to all over the city. The people used to think of the Reader as like it only went to white neighborhoods. Now it goes all over the city. So she's made a lot of improvements, and morale at the papers, I think is pretty good.
Isn't this the time, Mike, to ask people to donate to the Reader?
Please buy the book. Please buy the book.
Free paper. We read it and love it, and we have to pay for it.
Become a member. You can become a member. The Reader is now a not-for-profit organization. You can become a member by donating. There's all sorts of swag to buy to support independent journalism. Kathy, are there links?
Oh yes, at the top of the chat are the links to how you can acquire your books.
The books, and at the same page is are the links to all the different projects that the Reader has going to keep the lights on. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a jigsaw puzzle of the bean. There's a coloring book. There's sweatshirts. There's face masks. Everybody needs a Reader face mask. So.
I see that, Eric, you're unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just curious for Mike's thoughts on local sustainable or seasonal or farm to table. Total change of topic here, but just curious for your thoughts on that. I'm personally very interested, but curious for your thoughts on, farm to table, seasonal, and particularly sustainable restaurants that support that kind of stuff.
I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I've written a lot on that broad, huge, wide-ranging subject. It's particularly interesting right now that I think probably the Tribune has reported on this. I haven't, but the struggles farmers are facing right now that they have no restaurants to sell to. I have a column coming out next week about a small farmer I'll tell you about her next week, but she had to pivot her as well. She's working on an eighth of an acre on the former Robert Taylor homes on the south side in an incubator plot operated by the Chicago Botanic Gardens. And she had her first season out. She was going to sell a lot of rare produce to restaurants. And she had to, in March, she had to totally revise her crop program and pivot to a CSA because there weren't going to be any restaurants to buy from her anymore. She still managed to sell to some restaurants, but yeah, that's really interesting right now too. Like all these farms, the way this pandemic has reverberated. It's not just the hospitality industry; it's the dozens and dozens of ancillary industries that interact with it, and farmers are struggling just as much as restaurants are, and they're having to figure out what to do about it.
Well, I'm on the board of Green City Market, so one thing everyone can do is come to the market and support the local sustainable farmers that show up every Saturday, and get an app in order and all that kind of stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Good for you. I haven't been to the Green City Market this year. I'm sorry. I should correct that. I go to my regular is the Lincoln Square Farmers Market.
That's a good market, but come to Green City. I think you'd be.
I would have. On any other year, I'd have been there many times. But I promise I'll make up for that.
Awesome.
So what farming did you do on your roof this year, by the way?
I'm lucky enough to have a backyard now. So I have 2 raised beds in the backyard, and I have a long raised bed along the fence. I have some stuff on the front porch. It was a pretty good year. My tomatoes and chilies weren't as productive as last year, but it was really good. The coolest thing I grew this year was an Okinawan bitter melon. It's a white bitter melon that I really didn't have any hope for because it's I read about it and said it really needed extremely hot temperatures. It was really productive. I got like a half a dozen of these big, fat, gorgeous, like alabaster knobby bitter melons. They were beautiful. But things are winding down. I still have a few tomatoes and some chilies, and I planted my winter crops, some brassicas, some radishes. Still a couple more months to go. But the squirrels, that's the other thing too, is that when we moved here 6 years ago, and I started gardening here, like the squirrels didn't bother me. I don't know if they didn't discover it or not, but this year, during the pandemic, I treated myself to a bird feeder, and the squirrels came back. And I feel like I've made peace with squirrels. I'm okay with them now. I'm not gonna say we're friends, but this pair of squirrels saw this bird feeder hanging from the corner of the garage, and these squirrels are amazing because they come across the power lines, across the roof of the garage, and they dangle off the edge of the roof onto the bird feeder, head down, just like eating off the tray around the bird feeder. And they're also eating my tomatoes. But I have a lot. I can share my tomatoes with the squirrels. I don't know.
I was going to say, Mike, I have a personal hatred of squirrels, but I really enjoyed this video. I think maybe it's new. I don't know. I just saw it. The YouTube video with the young man who was a NASA engineer, and he does the thing in the backyard. I knew squirrels were smart, but I did like them a tiny bit better after I saw that 3 times.
That is an amazing video.
Because he's amazing, not more than the squirrels.
Yeah. Well, if you could, I mean, I don't have that on hand, but if you should post that in the chat, because that is incredible.
I think if you go to YouTube and just Google squirrel relay backyard NASA, you'll get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a delight.
Yeah.
I spoke at I think Cynthia Clampett's here. It was something she organized, but it was a Menzen convention of sorts, and they had one session just on squirrels, and they were the Menzens of the animal world. And they showed them working through these labyrinths. And some of them were quite complicated, but, persistence. And after a month, they went through the whole process.
And just as the YouTube video Joan's talking about sort of there's a lot of like slow motion and replays and things, and he really gets into the anatomy and these amazing, almost like seem like physically impossible contortions that these squirrels are capable of to get to what they want. It's incredible.
I think the very thing you mentioned, Mike, where the squirrels are hanging vertically, I think he measured their body weight versus gravity or something to tell us, more detail of what's happening to their bodies when he did that. This guy's really nuts in a good way. He's just an unemployed NASA guy, and he's just built this brilliant relay race for squirrels in his backyard.
Yeah. Highly recommended.
Mike, how did you cook your bitter melon?
I made Lila Bunyardaban's Thai bitter melon soup. Stuffed with, I sectioned them, stuffed them with ground pork, and just simmered them in a light chicken broth with a little bit of white pepper. So the other thing about them is that they turn really fast. They turn when they start to go bad. They turn like bright orange and collapse in on themselves. So I lost a few that way.
Yeah, they'll often.
My first one, I also I made a Pakistani recipe. I made a keema with them where I kind of I shallow fried them in oil till they got crispy, and then I think I sort of sautéed them with ground beef and a bunch of spices. That was really good.
I love when they want to like scream at you, "Hey, you got to pick me!" And then they open up and they have the bright red seeds. And I made a smoothie with some papaya and bitter melon tonight.
Once they turned? Are they okay when they turned, or is that a myth? Are they?
I think they're fine when they turn, Colleen. And I eat the seeds too. Apparently, Puerto Ricans love all that sweet flesh around the red seeds.
Oh, I missed out.
Which is why I love it.
Yeah, and they make great omelets. I have a Facebook page, Crazy for Bitter Melon, and Monica and Mike have contributed to it. And there's some good recipes for bitter melon on there. And bitter melon omelet is terrific.
Was that keema recipe? Is that where I got that keema recipe I just talked about?
No, it's not for me. No.
The woman I mentioned earlier that I'm writing about next week, this season, she grew 5 varieties of bitter melon in her little plot.
Oh, hook her up with my Facebook page.
Yeah, I meant to tell her about it. I will.
Thank you.
So are there any other questions? Thoughts?
I was going to suggest to those of you who don't like squirrels, Droll Yankees makes a spinning bird feeder. The weight of the squirrel actually makes it spin and they go flying. And if you really want to have fun, you take the battery out for a few days and then put it back in once they are accustomed to going back to it.
I love it.
Confuse a squirrel today.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just looking at these the chat right now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed this.
Have you thought about doing video, a review of a restaurant?
You know what another thing we did at the beginning of the pandemic was, so the Reader had this thing called Key Ingredient that started about 10 years ago, which was actually done. It was reported on by Julia Teal, and Michael Gebert did the video, and it was kind of a chef challenge where it started out where I challenged Grant Achatz to make something out of this Indonesian kind of a nut called kupas, which I had never heard of and he had never heard of, and so he made this like warm chocolatey cocktail with it, and and then Julia wrote the story. They published the recipe. Gebert shot a beautiful video, and then Achatz was able to challenge the next chef, and then that chef challenged the next chef with a weird ingredient, and they retired it. That won a James Beard Award. It was retired a couple years ago. It had sort of run its course, and then I tried to relaunch it at the beginning of the pandemic with what we called Key Ingredient Pandemic Pantry, and it was meant to be, because all these chefs now were like doing home cooking content in their home kitchens. So I just thought, let's get these guys to challenge each other to cook out of their pantries. And the first two were pretty good. It was Eric Williams kicked it off with I can't remember now what he did, but he passed it on to Brian Jupiter, and then Brian Jupiter passed it on to another chef, and it all fell apart from there because it was really hard to get these chefs to actually shoot the videos. It was really just for a number of reasons. Chefs are good at a lot of things, but putting together short Instagrammable home videos weren't one of them. So the whole thing fell apart. Yeah, so we did a little bit of video at the beginning of the pandemic. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe this winter. Who knows?
Well, Mike, this was terrific. I'm really glad you were willing to spend time with us and tell your story.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor. It's been a dream of mine. I mean, you asked me a long time ago to come and talk, and I don't remember why it never happened, but thanks. Thank you.
That happens sometimes. That happens. It's just because maybe we weren't ready. But now you have the right thing.
I think it was my fault. I think I wasn't ready. I feel like I don't know. I think I hedged for some reason. I'm not sure why. But I apologize. I'm so glad you guys had me.
Nothing to apologize for. At the same time, we wanted to be supportive of your project.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.